I was 25 when I got the job of running the Mel Blanc studio, but I knew how to do that. Everything I needed to learn, I had learned in radio.
Welcome back to the Talking Archive. I'm Josh Jacobs, and our conversation continues now with Chuck McKibben. He's the author of the book Mel Blanc, The Voice of Bugs Bunny, ... and me. Inside the studio with Hollywood's man of 1,000 voices. Now, Chuck, we were on the phone together before the interview talking about Mel Blanc and how he was a method actor.
Yes, he was. He became the character. He never took a lesson about anything in his life. He was this crazy, inventive sponge for voices in Oregon, where he grew up. He was born in San Francisco, but he really grew up in Portland, Oregon. And he had a show called Cobwebs and Nuts on a big station out there, but they paid him next to nothing. And of course, he's creating all these wonderful, great characters for them for peanuts. Well, he knows that there could be a better opportunity. Here's a parallel between his life and mine that I've discovered. He traveled without a job waiting down to Southern California from Oregon, saying, I got to go someplace bigger with greater opportunities. And he did get to work there at KFWB. This is never told in the true story of Mel Blanc. He did get a job in Southern California on their owned and operated radio station. That's what the WB and KFWB stood for. It was on the lot. But what was happening was every couple of weeks, and Randy West tells this story accurately, he would go to the casting director in the cartoon division, Termite Terrace, and say, I've got a lot of great characters I could do. Would you let me audition? And the guy said, nah, we got you radio actors covered. We got plenty of radio actors to do these crazy voices. Go away. You're bothering us. Well, that was pretty stupid. If you're a casting director, listen to anybody and everybody who says, I got something to offer. You know, that's your job. But Mel would tell the story, and then he said, one day this guy died. And he told it in such a matter-of-fact way that it always created a huge laugh in his classroom. This guy died. No, sadly, he passed away. No, Mel was very blunt about things like that. He was even blunt about his own death. He said, someday I'm going to kick the bucket and my son is going to do my voices. You know, no like, well, when I pass away, he didn't use phrases like that. Mel was a real earthy kind of guy. In his humor, too, he could tell a dirty joke like anybody's business, honestly. And June Foray sometimes got a little upset about that. Wow. She was too much of a lady really to complain about it. He was earthy, not dirty, really, but he was not highfalutin. He was not a fancy Dan kind of guy. He was Mel, you know? And I only called him that. I didn't say Mr. Blank. I'm happy to say he became a good friend to me, not just my employer. So we had all his people coming in, you know, who he knew, but one of them that he didn't have any friendship with called him a very bad word. I won't, this is a family podcast, I won't use the word, but it was an insulting description of the guy. And he said, Paul Frees is a guy who nobody in Hollywood likes. And Noel echoed that. He said, yeah, nobody likes Paul. But Paul was probably his biggest rival. One day I asked Mel, who are your biggest challengers to your, you know, kingship of being the greatest voice guy? Who's a problem? He said, well, there's Dawes Butler, but everything he does sounds Southern. He's a real nice guy, though. He's a real sweetheart. Of course, he trained Nancy Cartwright. And then there's Paul Frees. He's just not me. That's all. You know, he just doesn't have my credentials. Because Paul Frees never did the huge characters like Bugs Bunny. You know, Bugs Bunny has been called the greatest cartoon character ever, bigger than Mickey Mouse, and was cooler and hipper. When you think about it, here's the huge difference between Disney, which I loved. Believe me, I was a Disney fanatic. And I really, really, really wanted to meet Annette Funicello. Oh, my God. I did marry an Italian girl.
Oh, there you go. Did the next best thing.
And she knows I had a thing for Annette. Come on, I was 10.
Now, does your wife look like Annette is my question.
Well, she's got the Italian features. She's a beautiful lady. She taught yoga for years. In great shape. Beautiful, beautiful young lady when I met her. Unfortunately, she liked me well enough to marry me. So I'm a one-time married guy. Long story short, Paul Frees, they hate him, but he's booked at the Mel Blanc studio to do Paul Parrott shoes. This is a line of children's kiddie shoes. I don't know if they're even in business, but Paul, P-O-L-L, Parrott, Paul Parrott shoes. Mm-hmm. So they're going to do a radio commercial, these two enemies. Oh my God, sparks are going to fly. So Paul shows up as the Baron. And back in the studio, I hear him as he enters the front room. And he says loudly enough, you could hear him probably 12 floors down, "Please to tell Mr. Bank that the Baron is here." What? The Baron. I go out and I look, and the man is very short. He's maybe 5'3", mm-hmm. and he's wearing a top hat, a bright shiny cane, a cape. He's dressed like a European baron, and he's in that character the entire time he's there. As we get him back to the studio, he stays in character, talks back to me through the glass in character, and this is mind-blowing. So they go into doing the lines. They're on separate mics, and they're looking about 6 feet apart from each other on our Sony C37 microphones. Great. If you can pony up about $7,000, you might find one.
Wow.
So they were very proud of those mics. Noel was intensely proud of the mics he picked out. So anyway, the two of them are going at it, and at some point, 2 or 3 full takes into it, somebody flubs a line. Oh my God. It starts. "You call yourself a voice actor?" What kind of foolishness is that? You cannot read when you stare at the paper? And they start to insult each other with the dirtiest things they can think to say in character. And every character they can come up with. Can you top this? Well, I'm still rolling tape on the Ampex. We got a 14-inch reel of blank tape there, but it's being eaten up, by all of this. So I go to reach to, we're actually ducked behind the console because we're laughing our butts off. We can't stop. We're rolling on the floor because here's these two giants trying to club each other to death with their cartoon voices. He says, "Don't turn it off. Don't turn it off. Let it roll." This is gold. This is gold. But immediately after that, and after he left, that reel went into the lock and key because it was well known that outtakes were all over the place in Hollywood on reel-to-reel tapes. I heard that famous outtake of Orson Welles selling the big dish of peas there at the Mel Blanc studio. I once had a copy. Now it's on the internet, and there's dozens of people who've animated it and all that, but that's where I first heard those outtakes. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin insulting each other at the Caddy promos and calling each other dirty names. One of the more tame ones was Jerry calls Dean, "You greaseball," and stuff like that. Oh my God. And this is apparently in front of a lot of techies, a lot of the crew. Uh-huh. I think what they did was just try to record the promos on the set and maybe even outdoors or something while they had a chance, because you hear other people kind of nervously laughing. These two entertainment giants, they owned the comedy business for 10 years, and they're calling each other dirty names and real insults, So I asked, after Paul left the studio, what is this business with him being the Baron? And Noel says, he thinks it's boring to be just Paul. So he goes into a character. And at some times he'll be the king. The king is here, and he'll have 2 beautiful starlets on each arm that he's hired to accompany him, just to make an impression. He says he's a character and a half. And I did tell you about the record album he made. For your listeners, if you ever find one called The Poster People by Paul Frees, it's a 12-inch album. At the time, old Hollywood stars were making a huge comeback in the form of posters that teenagers and college kids in particular hung on their walls thinking this is retro cool. Okay, a Humphrey Bogart picture from Casablanca, for instance, or W.C. Fields as My Little Chickadee from that movie with Mae West. These were very, very big. They were selling out everywhere. So Paul Frees did a record album as these old-time movie characters singing songs, if you can imagine that. Pop songs of the 60s or 70s as, say, the villainous... it was Peter Lorre. He did a song that was very popular in the 40s called My Old Flame. I can't even remember her name, but it's funny now and then how my mind goes racing back again to My Old Flame. Only he does it as spooky Peter Lorre. My old flame. I can't even remember her name. What was it? Was it Lois? Was it June? I don't remember. Anyway, it comes back to me now and then, but it's driving me crazy. I think I'm going sane. Doing a record like that. Okay. I have not heard the whole record. If you ever find it, folks, buy it on the spot. It's extremely collectible. I'm sure it sold practically no copies, because nobody knew who Paul Frees was. But he was the voice of the Haunted Mansion at Disney parks, and people refused when those tapes just plain wore out. Billy West or somebody of his caliber said, I will not do a Paul Frees imitation. You restore that tape because he's the one and only. Okay, so he did get a lot of respect in the business, and he worked all the time, especially for Disney, doing hour-long Disneyland shows as narrator, or a great show to look up if you've never seen it. There was an hour-long episode which featured Ludwig von Drake, whose voice he did. He sings the Color song, and it's spectacular. Nobody can do this. Nobody but Paul Frees could do it. He's just, when you watch it, it's online, and you watch it and you say, a human can't do that. And then Ludwig von Drake was created as a character to sell color TV and to talk about color TV, because Walt Disney had jumped from ABC, where they helped him get started by funding Disneyland partially. He now says, oh, there's color? Oh, I want to be in color. NBC has that. Nobody else does.
That's
and
right,
nobody is likely to have it for a while. So he jumped ship to NBC and created then a different name. Instead of Disneyland, now the show was called The Wonderful World of Color.
The world is a carousel of color.
Color. Wonderful color.
They actually play that song at Disney California Adventure. They have a show, a water show called World of Color. Now, it's not the same people that sang the theme for the show. It's a female vocalist instead, but it is that song. I'm like, hey, this is awesome, paying tribute to the old show.
Yeah, and that's great. I didn't know that. I haven't been to a Disney park since I went to Disneyland when I lived in Southern California, and was a little disappointed that as an adult, by the way, I was 25. I don't think I've mentioned that. I was 25 when I got the job of running the Mel Blanc studio, but I knew how to do that. Everything I needed to learn, I had learned in radio, frankly. I'm going to tell you honestly, and this, if it discredits me, well, so what? I think any disc jockey could have done the job, because if you knew how to run a production studio at a radio station that was half well equipped, you knew how to run the Mel Blanc studio. It wasn't that different at all. You knew how to go out and buy raw tape. They told you where they bought it from and all that. Really managing the studio at 25, I was about the right age, a young man's job. You know, I had the energy to do it. And I do think that my speech, being pretty good by most standards, being a professional pronouncer on the radio, helped me, because I could talk to these major stars and not embarrass myself. I didn't say things like, yeah, I seen you in a movie. I could speak the way they spoke. And I was neat and clean and presentable, because obviously you don't want some, dirty, scruffy looking guy in a torn T-shirt to be meeting these stars who come in. And I met, and worked with Kirk Douglas, very sweet man. He didn't look anything like Spartacus when he walked in the room. He was maybe 5'7".
Wow.
I was at the time 5'6".
Mm-hmm.
A very sad session, I thought, was with the creator of the Twilight Zone, Rod Serling. He smoked 5 packs of cigarettes a day.
Dang.
I mean, there's 20 cigarettes in a pack. So when was he breathing actually clean air, And his face showed it. He was all rough looking. His skin was leathery beyond belief. His forehead looked like it had been plowed by a mule. And frankly, he walked in the room and he said, into the studio where I met him, he says to me, young man, I hate the sound of my voice. Can you do something to improve it? And I looked at him and said, Mr. Serling, You're known as one of the greatest narrators of all time. By then, he was doing National Geographic specials as a narrator and the like, and he was being hired, as a voice. But what I discovered was this five-time Emmy winning writer, did not see himself as a talent at all. He's a writer, and he didn't even want to be the host of the show. He didn't want to bring the show on. He wanted Orson Welles to do it. Because he would have given it the gravitas. But CBS, being very tight budgeted with Serling, said, no way, we're not paying him. He always wants too much money. He's very difficult to work with. We're not putting up with him. We heard the stories about the making of Citizen Kane, how he told everybody to get off his set and all that. The executives had to leave the building. So, no, we're not working with Welles. And then he named another actor who had done 12 O'Clock High on TV. I don't remember his name. They said, well, how about him? And they said, no. If you're going to have a host, you're it. So that's how he got to be the host of the Twilight Zone.
Wow.
And that famous voice then was very marketable. But basically, he was doing this job for the dough, for the money, because he was also known as that angry young man who you couldn't get along with, who always wanted to do message shows. And, he wanted to do things about racism. He wanted to do shows about politics and all that. But if you said, that your principal wonderful character is a Democrat or a Republican, you're in trouble, because the other side is going to scream bloody murder that you made your hero a one or the other. And he talks about that in a couple of his interviews. He said, I couldn't have a political figure be a member of any known party. I'd either have to dream one up or, just not mention it or something. But he wanted Donna Douglas in that thing where she's had her face worked on, and they're pig people who are the nurses and the doctors. That was going to be about trying to reverse somebody's skin color. I don't know if she was going to be a black girl and they were going to be white, who were trying to cure your being black. Well, CBS said, that's not going to play in the South. Holy cow. We're going to have trouble with the Southern affiliates. No, you can't do that. Make them pig people. Make them aliens. And that's why he made so many shows about aliens, because he wanted to address social issues, which he did do in Planet of the Apes, which he wrote the first one. He wanted to say, what if we lived in a land of apes who behaved like people and had all the flaws of human beings? And you're the monkey. Well, brilliant. Absolutely. Of course, a smash hit. But he wouldn't do any sequels because they wanted to dumb it down. Let's do a sequel or 3 or 4. And he wanted no part of that. I've made my statement. It's done. And you're definitely not going to turn it into a weekly series on TV. And you asked me about Night Gallery. Well, I know the truth of that. He said the truth. He had almost nothing to do with it. He lent his name and fame to it. He hosted it and seldom wrote or had any input on the making of the show. I thought it was horrible. I thought it was a bad copy of all the spookiness of Twilight Zone, which is what he was told to keep repeating. Make it spooky, Rod, make it spooky. He didn't want to do that. Twilight Zone wasn't about aliens and spookiness. It wasn't a horror show. It wasn't The Outer Limits, in other words. And he was very uncomfortable with the suits telling him how to make his show. Because, hey, I'm the writer. You're suits. You know how to count coins. So basically, he was going to be there to do photo, fun, teaser commercials to introduce a photo booth like Photomat at Ralph's Supermarkets in Northern California. And it was a teaser campaign where you would hear Rod Serling with spooky music in the background saying, it's the picture of things to come. Photo, fun. Coming this week to a Ralph's Supermarket near you. Okay. They did increase business at Ralph's by about 25% because people came in to see what is Rod Serling talking about. Well, it's just a damn photo booth is all. When the client came to us and said, we want to tell people we have a roll of 36 exposure film for $1.35, and Noel cut them off. He said, you're not going to get any clientele from that. What, you want to compete on price? You're in a grocery store. Anybody shopping at a different store is never going to see you. You have to drive them to the Ralph's Markets, force them out of curiosity to come to Ralph's Markets, a big chain. And if they go to some other store, they don't care about going to buy a roll of film. They won't change their shopping habits for a roll of film. And that's all true, by the way. I learned a lot about advertising, spending 30 years in ad agencies as a producer. But it was a very smart campaign, and it worked. And Photo, Fun is pretty much the stupidest name I've ever heard for anything. FOTO, Photo, Fun.
Oh, okay.
What? Were they Japanese or something? Happy Place movie picture place, or I don't know.
Maybe it was repeated for effect, like Mary Hartman. We are talking with Chuck McKibben, voiceover talent production director, as well as the author of the book Mel Blanc, The Voice of Bugs Bunny, ... and me. Inside the studio with Hollywood's man of 1,000 voices. You can get it at Amazon.com or different websites for purchase, and it's got a cover. In fact, you're looking at the cover on the podcast right now. And next time, Chuck talks about the difference between the studios of Disney as well as The Simpsons.